Wealthy family loses everything in financial scam. Grandma's recipe book holds code to secret bank account. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. Imagine waking up one morning to find that everything you ever knew, everything you ever trusted, was gone. The Henderson family had it all: wealth, power, respect, until, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. But what if the key to their salvation lies hidden in the most unexpected place? As the walls of their luxurious life crumble around them, one innocent discovery by a young boy could unravel decades of family secrets. But will it be enough to save them? Or will this revelation tear them apart forever? The answers are hidden in a simple, worn-out recipe book that holds more than just family traditions. It holds the fate of the Hendersons. You won't believe where this story will take you, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of it. On a crisp autumn morning in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, the Henderson family estate stood as a monument to generational wealth and success. The sprawling mansion, with its manicured lawns and gleaming windows, had been the envy of the neighborhood for decades. But today, the air hung heavy with an impending storm that would shake the very foundations of this seemingly unshakable family. Sarah Henderson, the 78-year-old matriarch, sat in her sunroom, her weathered hands cradling a cup of Earl Grey tea. Her steel-gray hair was perfectly coiffed, and her eyes, though lined with age, sparkled with a wisdom that had guided her family through both triumphs and tribulations. As she gazed out at the garden she had lovingly tended for half a century, a sense of foreboding tugged at her heart. The sound of expensive Italian leather shoes echoing through the marble hallway announced the arrival of her eldest son, Michael. At 52, Michael was the epitome of corporate success, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair styled to perfection. He strode into the room, his Rolex glinting in the morning light, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, Mother," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Big day today. We're finalizing the deal that'll double our family fortune." Sarah's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "Michael, dear, are you certain about this investment? It seems too good to be true." Michael's smile faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "Mother, please. I've been working on this for months. Trust me, it's foolproof." As if on cue, David, Michael's younger brother, entered the room. At 48, David was Michael's antithesis, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, his kind eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. He was followed closely by his wife, Emma, and their 12-year-old son, Lucas. "Uncle Mike," Lucas exclaimed, his eyes shining with admiration. "Are we really going to be billionaires after today?" Michael ruffled Lucas's hair affectionately. "You bet, kiddo. Your old uncle's about to make history." David exchanged a worried glance with his wife. "Michael, I hope you know what you're doing. That's our entire family fortune you're playing with." Before Michael could retort, Sarah raised her hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Boys, please, let's not start the day with bickering. Why don't we all have breakfast together? It's been too long since we've done that." As the family gathered around the grand dining table, laden with a spread that would rival a five-star hotel's buffet, the tension in the air was palpable. Sarah watched her family with a mixture of love and concern. Michael, constantly checking his phone, barely touched his food. David and Emma whispered to each other, their faces etched with worry. Only Lucas seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of anxiety, happily devouring his waffles and chattering about his upcoming science fair project. Suddenly, Michael's phone rang, shattering the uneasy calm. His face lit up as he answered, "Johnson, yes, I'm ready for the transfer. Let's make history, my friend." The next few moments unfolded in slow motion, etching themselves into the family's collective memory forever. Michael's triumphant grin slowly morphed into a look of confusion, then disbelief, and finally, abject horror. The phone slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the mahogany table. It's gone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "All of it. Every last cent. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. Lucas looked around in confusion, his fork suspended midair. Sarah, however, remained eerily calm. She slowly stood up, her small frame suddenly commanding the room's attention. "Michael," she said, her voice steady but laced with a pain that cut through the air like a knife. "What have you done?" "The dam broke." Michael collapsed to his knees, sobs racking his body. "It was a scam," he choked out between gasps. "Johnson, the company, the promises, all fake. They've disappeared with everything. Our savings, our investments, the house, it's all gone." The revelation hit the family like a physical blow. Emma burst into tears, clutching Lucas to her chest. David slumped against the wall, his face ashen. And Michael, the once proud titan of industry, lay crumpled on the floor, a broken man. In that moment of utter devastation, it was Sarah who remained standing. Her eyes, filled with unshed tears, surveyed the ruins of her family's life. She had seen this coming, had tried to warn them, but her words had fallen on deaf ears, drowned out by the siren song of greed and ambition. As the chaos unfolded around her, Michael's wails, Emma's sobs, David's angry accusations, Sarah quietly slipped away. She made her way to her bedroom, her steps heavy with the weight of her family's downfall. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and moved to her antique dresser. With trembling hands, she pulled out an old, battered notebook. The cover was faded, its pages yellowed with age, held together by memories and hope. It was her recipe book, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Sarah clutched the book to her chest, tears finally spilling down her weathered cheeks. "Oh, Robert," she whispered to her long-departed husband, "if only you were here. You always knew this day might come." She opened the book, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. Hidden among the recipes for pot roast and apple pie were cryptic notes and numbers, a secret she had guarded for decades. "Maybe," she murmured, "there's still a way back from this." Unbeknownst to Sarah, young Lucas had followed his grandmother. He stood outside her door, his ear pressed against the wood, his young mind racing to understand the sudden upheaval in his world. As he heard his grandmother's whispered words, a spark of curiosity ignited in his eyes. In that moment, as the Henderson family's world crumbled around them, the seeds of an extraordinary journey were sown, a journey that would test their love, challenge their values, and ultimately redefine the true meaning of wealth. The Henderson mansion, once a beacon of prosperity, now stood as a haunting reminder of shattered dreams. The autumn air, crisp and biting, seemed to mirror the family's harsh new reality. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, regret, and the acrid smell of burnt coffee, a testament to how even the simplest tasks had become overwhelming in the wake of their financial ruin. In the study, Michael paced frantically, his designer suit now wrinkled and stained, a far cry from his usual impeccable appearance. His brother David sat slumped in a leather armchair, his glasses askew, staring blankly at a stack of foreclosure notices. "This is all your fault," Michael suddenly exploded, whirling on David. "If you hadn't been so damn cautious, if you had backed me up more." David's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a mix of hurt and anger. "My fault? You're the one who gambled everything we had on a pipe dream, Michael. I told you it was too risky, but you never listen. You never have." Their voices echoed through the halls, a cacophony of blame and bitterness that seemed to seep into the very walls of the home that would soon no longer be theirs. Upstairs, young Lucas pressed his ear against his bedroom door, his heart racing as he listened to his father and uncle's argument. The past 24 hours had turned his world upside down, transforming his once invincible family into strangers he barely recognized. With trembling hands, Lucas reached under his pillow and pulled out his grandmother's recipe book. He had swiped it from her room earlier, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the whispered words he'd overheard. As he opened the worn cover, a slip of paper fluttered to the floor, a faded photograph of his grandparents in their youth. standing in front of a modest cabin in the woods. Lucas's fingers traced the image, his mind drifting to happier times when his grandmother would regale him with stories of his grandfather's adventures. Robert Henderson had been a man larger than life, a self-made millionaire who never forgot his humble beginnings. As Lucas flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. Hidden among recipes for apple pie and pot roast were strange symbols, numbers, and cryptic notes scrawled in the margins. It was as if the book held two stories, one of comforting home-cooked meals, and another of secrets long buried. A soft knock at the door startled Lucas. He quickly shoved the book under his pillow as his mother, Emma, entered the room. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally pristine appearance disheveled. "Hey, sweetie," Emma said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How are you holding up?" Lucas shrugged, his young mind struggling to articulate the whirlwind of emotions he felt. "Mom, why is everyone fighting? Can't we just get our money back?" Emma's facade crumbled, and she pulled Lucas into a tight embrace. "Oh, honey, I wish it were that simple. Sometimes adults make mistakes, big ones. But we'll figure this out, I promise." As Emma held her son, her gaze fell on a corner of the recipe book peeking out from under his pillow. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a frown of confusion. "Lucas, is that your grandmother's recipe book?" she asked, reaching for it. Panic flashed in Lucas's eyes. I just wanted to look at it. Grandma's always telling stories about it." Emma's fingers brushed the worn cover, a distant memory stirring in her mind. She remembered Sarah once mentioning that the book held more than just recipes, that it was a key to understanding Robert's legacy. At the time, Emma had dismissed it as the ramblings of a sentimental old woman. But now, "You know what?" Emma said, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Why don't we go talk to Grandma? I think she might have some stories that could help us all right now." As they made their way to Sarah's room, they passed Michael slumped against the wall in the hallway, his head in his hands. The sight of his broken father stirred something in Lucas, a resolve to uncover whatever secrets the recipe book held, to find a way to fix his fractured family. Sarah's room was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun when they entered. The old woman sat in her rocking chair, her eyes distant as if lost in memories. When she saw Lucas clutching the recipe book, a mix of emotions flashed across her face. Surprise, concern, and something else. Relief? "I see you found your grandfather's legacy," Sarah said softly, holding out her hand for the book. Lucas hesitated, then placed it in her weathered palm. "Grandma, what does it mean? There's all these weird notes and numbers." Sarah's eyes twinkled with a spark of their old mischief. "Oh, my dear boy, this book, it's so much more than a collection of recipes. It's a map, a key to understanding the true wealth your grandfather left behind." Emma leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Sarah, what are you talking about? What wealth? Everything's gone." Sarah shook her head, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Not everything, my dear. Robert, he was a man who understood that true riches aren't always measured in dollars and cents. He left us a trail, a series of tests to remind us of what really matters." As Sarah began to recount tales of Robert's early days, of the values he held dear and the legacy he wanted to leave, Lucas felt a glimmer of hope ignite in his chest. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Henderson estate. But within Sarah's room, a new light began to shine, the promise of a journey that would test their bonds, challenge their perceptions, and perhaps lead them to a treasure far greater than the fortune they had lost. In that moment, as grandmother, grandson, and daughter-in-law huddled together over the mysterious recipe book, the first seeds of redemption were sown. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of an adventure that would redefine the very meaning of family, wealth, and what it truly means to be rich. The following morning, a pale sun struggled to penetrate the heavy clouds hanging over the Henderson estate, mirroring the somber mood within. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, absently pushing soggy cereal around his bowl, his mind racing with the revelations from the previous night. The recipe book lay beside him, its presence both a comfort and a source of anxiety. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, and Michael stumbled into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot and his expensive silk pajamas rumpled. He made a beeline for the coffee maker, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the filters. "Dad," Lucas began hesitantly, "I need to talk to you about something important." Michael grunted non-committally, focused on his desperate need for caffeine. Undeterred, Lucas pressed on. "It's about Grandma's recipe book. I think it might be able to help us." At this, Michael turned, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as they fell on the worn notebook. "Lucas, now's not the time for games or fairy tales. We're in real trouble here, and your grandmother's cookie recipes aren't going to fix anything." The harshness in his father's voice made Lucas flinch. He'd never seen his dad like this, defeated, bitter, a shell of the confident man he once was. But the memory of his grandmother's words and the mysterious notes in the book steeled his resolve. "But Dad, it's not just recipes. There are codes and clues," and Grandma said, "Enough." Michael slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. "I don't want to hear about some wild goose chase. We need real solutions, not childish fantasies." Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes, a mix of frustration and disappointment threatening to overflow. Just then, David entered the kitchen, immediately sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gentle voice a stark contrast to Michael's outburst. Lucas turned to his uncle, hope rekindling. "Uncle David, please, you have to look at this. I think Grandpa left us something important." David glanced at Michael, who was now slumped at the counter, his head in his hands. With a sigh, he sat down next to Lucas. "All right, buddy, show me what you've got." As Lucas excitedly opened the book and began pointing out the strange notations and cryptic messages, David's skepticism slowly gave way to curiosity. He'd always been more open-minded than his brother, more willing to consider unconventional ideas. "You know," David mused, adjusting his glasses, "your grandpa was always full of surprises. He loved puzzles and riddles. Said they kept the mind sharp." Michael scoffed from his position at the counter. "Oh, come on, David. Don't encourage this nonsense. We need to focus on reality, on salvaging what we can." But David wasn't listening. His eyes had caught something in the book, a series of numbers that seemed vaguely familiar. "Lucas, hand me that magnifying glass on the counter, will you?" As David peered closely at the page, his eyes widened. "These coordinates, I think I recognize this place. It's that old cabin where Dad used to take us fishing when we were kids." Lucas's heart raced with excitement. So it is a map. Grandma was right. Even Michael couldn't hide his curiosity now, peering over David's shoulder at the book. "But what does it mean? Why would Dad leave us a treasure hunt when we're about to lose everything?" David stood up, a determined glint in his eye. "I don't know, but I think we owe it to Dad, and to ourselves, to find out. Lucas, go pack a bag. We're taking a little road trip." As Lucas dashed off, brimming with excitement, Michael grabbed David's arm. "Are you crazy? We don't have time for this." David met his brother's gaze steadily. "Michael, what else do we have? Our money's gone, our reputation's in tatters. Maybe, just maybe, Dad left us something more valuable than we realize. What have we got to lose?" Upstairs, Sarah watched from her window as David's old station wagon pulled out of the driveway. Lucas's face pressed eagerly against the glass. A small smile played on her lips as she clutched a framed photo of her late husband. "Oh, Robert," she whispered. "You always knew this day might come. I hope they're ready for what you've prepared for them." As the car disappeared down the tree-lined street, the Henderson family stood at a crossroads. In following the clues left by their patriarch, would they find the key to their salvation? Or were they chasing shadows, delaying the inevitable collapse of everything they held dear? The old cabin waited in the woods, holding secrets that would challenge their understanding of family, wealth, and the true meaning of legacy. And as the first drops of rain began to fall on the windshield, Lucas felt a shiver of anticipation. Their journey had only just begun. The old station wagon groaned as it navigated the bumpy dirt road leading deep into the Connecticut woods. Inside, an uneasy silence hung between David and Lucas, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the old radio and the rustle of map pages. "Are you sure this is the right way, Uncle David?" Lucas asked, his nose pressed against the window, watching the dense forest pass by in a blur of autumn colors. David chuckled nervously, adjusting his glasses. "Well, it's been almost 30 years since I've been here, kiddo. But your grandpa's coordinates haven't steered us wrong yet." As they rounded a bend, a small clearing came into view. There, nestled among towering pines and maples ablaze with fall foliage, stood a weathered log cabin. Its windows were dark, shutters hanging crookedly, and the porch sagged slightly under the weight of years gone by. "Wow," Lucas breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "It looks just like in the old photos." They pulled up in front of the cabin, gravel crunching under the tires. As they stepped out, the crisp autumn air filled their lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and wood smoke. "I can't believe it's still standing," David murmured, a flood of childhood memories washing over him. He could almost hear the echo of his father's laughter, the splash of fish being reeled in from the nearby lake. Lucas was already bounding up the porch steps, recipe book clutched tightly in his hands. "Come on, Uncle David. The next clue has to be inside." But as they reached the front door, they found it securely padlocked. David frowned, tugging at the rusted metal. "Well, that's a problem. Your grandpa didn't happen to leave the combination in that book of his, did he?" Lucas's face fell, but only for a moment. His eyes lit up as he flipped through the pages. "Wait, there's a note here about a key under the old oak where the sun sets." They spent the next hour searching the property, checking every oak tree they could find. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, David slumped against a tree trunk, exhausted and discouraged. "Maybe we're on a wild goose chase after all, Lucas," he sighed. "Your dad might have been right." But Lucas wasn't ready to give up. As he leaned against the tree next to his uncle, something caught his eye. There, carved faintly into the bark, was a small arrow pointing downward. "Uncle David, look!" he exclaimed, dropping to his knees and scrabbling at the ground beneath the tree. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. With trembling hands, Lucas pulled out an old key, green with age but still intact. David's eyes widened in disbelief. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "Your grandpa really did think of everything." As they approached the cabin once more, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and the door creaked open, revealing an interior frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the fading sunlight that streamed through the windows. Faded photographs lined the walls, and well-worn furniture stood as silent sentinels to countless family memories. On the old oak table in the center of the room lay an envelope, yellowed with age but unopened. With shaking hands, David picked it up. "It's addressed to the family," he said softly. As he began to read the letter aloud, Robert Henderson's voice seemed to fill the cabin, bridging the gap between past and present. "My dear family, if you're reading this, then times have become difficult, and you've chosen to follow the path I've laid out for you. I'm proud of you for taking this first step. What I'm about to tell you may come as a shock, but please understand that everything I've done has been out of love for our family. There is indeed a secret bank account, one that contains a substantial sum enough to secure the family's future for generations to come. But accessing it won't be as simple as you might hope. You see, true wealth isn't just about money. It's about the bonds we forge, the values we uphold, and the legacy we leave behind. That's why I've set up a series of challenges. Each one is designed not just to test your wit, but your character, your ability to come together as a family in the face of adversity. Only when you've completed these tasks or tasks that will require all of you to work together, to confront your flaws, and to rediscover what truly matters, will you be able to access the account. Your next clue awaits you at the place where our family's journey truly began. Remember, the greatest treasures often lie where we least expect them. With all my love and faith in you, Robert Henderson. As David finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Lucas looked up at his uncle, eyes shining with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "So, what do we do now?" David folded the letter carefully, a determined set to his jaw. "Now we go home. It's time to bring the whole family into this. Your grandpa was right. We need to face this together." As they locked up the cabin and headed back to the car, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Unknown to them, back at the Henderson estate, Michael paced in his study, a tumbler of scotch in hand, wrestling with his own demons and the growing realization that perhaps he couldn't face this crisis alone. The stage was set for a family reunion unlike any other one that would test their bonds, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately redefine what it meant to be a Henderson. As the old station wagon wound its way back through the darkening woods, carrying with it the weight of Robert Henderson's final challenge, the true journey was only just beginning. The Henderson mansion buzzed with a nervous energy as the family gathered in the grand living room. The once opulent space now felt hollow, stripped of its luxurious trappings as items were sold off to stave off creditors. Michael stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, a glass of scotch clutched tightly in his hand. Emma sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. Sarah watched from her wheelchair, her eyes sharp and alert despite her frail appearance. David cleared his throat, the letter from the cabin crisp in his hands. "I think you all need to hear this," he said, his voice steady as he began to read aloud their father's words. As David's voice filled the room with Robert Henderson's final message, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Michael's face contorted through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, a flicker of hope. Emma's eyes welled with tears, while Sarah nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had long suspected. When David finished, a heavy silence blanketed the room. It was Michael who broke it, his voice hoarse. "So, Dad left us a wild goose chase instead of just helping his family? Typical." "Michael," Sarah chided gently, "your father was always thinking 3 steps ahead. This isn't just about money. It's about something far more valuable." Lucas, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly piped up. "The letter said the next clue is where our family's journey began." "What does that mean?" All eyes turned to Sarah, who smiled enigmatically. "Ah, now that's the question, isn't it? Robert always said our real fortune began the day we met." Emma leaned forward, intrigued. "Where was that, Sarah?" "The old Rosewood Diner," Sarah replied, her eyes misting with nostalgia. "It's where Robert proposed to me, over a slice of cherry pie and a cup of coffee that cost him his last dollar." Michael scoffed, pacing the room. "So what, we're supposed to go to some rundown diner and hope Dad left us a magical clue? This is ridiculous." David stood up, facing his brother. "What choice do we have, Michael? Our funds are drying up, we're about to lose everything. If there's even a chance this could save our family, don't we owe it to ourselves, to Dad, to try?" A tense moment passed between the brothers, years of rivalry and resentment bubbling just beneath the surface. Finally, Michael's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine, we'll check out the diner. But I'm not getting my hopes up." The next morning, the Hendersons piled into 2 cars, Michael driving his luxury sedan with Emma and Sarah, while David took Lucas in the old station wagon. The drive to the small town where Sarah and Robert had met was tense, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might find. The Rosewood Diner stood on the outskirts of town, a faded relic of 1950s Americana. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the gray morning light, and the parking lot was nearly empty save for a few rusty pickup trucks. As they entered, the smell of coffee and grease enveloped them. A tired-looking waitress approached, her eyebrows raising at the sight of the well-dressed family. "Sit anywhere you like, folks," she drawled. Sarah's eyes lit up as she scanned the room. "Over there," she pointed. "That's where we always Saturday." They settled into the worn vinyl booth, an air of expectancy hanging over them. Lucas immediately began examining every inch of the table and seats, looking for hidden clues. "Now what?" Michael grumbled, clearly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings. Just then, the waitress returned. "What can I get for you folks?" Sarah smiled warmly. "A slice of cherry pie and a cup of coffee, please. Just like old times." As the waitress turned to leave, Sarah called out, "Oh, and could you bring us the special menu, dear?" The waitress froze, her eyes widening slightly. "The special menu? I haven't heard anyone ask for that in years." She hurried away, returning moments later with a dusty, leather-bound book. With trembling hands, Sarah opened it. Inside was not a menu, but a collection of photographs, news clippings, and handwritten notes, a scrapbook of Robert and Sarah's life together. "Your father and I started this the day we got engaged," Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion. "We'd add to it every time we came here, marking all our big moments." As they flipped through the pages, reliving the Henderson family history, Lucas suddenly pointed at a small envelope tucked into the back cover. "Look!" David carefully extracted the envelope, addressed simply to "My family." Inside was another letter along with a small key. As David read aloud, Robert's words once again echoed through time. "My dear ones, if you've made it this far, you've taken the first step in understanding that our family's strength lies not in our bank accounts, but in our shared history and the love that binds us. The key enclosed will open a safety deposit box at Greenville National Bank. But before you rush off, know this: what you find there may not be what you expect. Remember, the true test is not in the destination, but in the journey itself. Your next task awaits you at the place where I learned the true value of $1. Seek out Mr. Chun, he holds the next piece of our puzzle. Stay strong, stay together. Love, Robert." As David finished reading, a mix of excitement and apprehension filled the air. The promise of the safety deposit box tantalized them, yet Robert's cryptic warning gave them pause. Michael, his earlier skepticism somewhat softened, spoke up. "Mr. Chun, wasn't that Dad's old boss at the factory where he worked during college?" Sarah nodded, a knowing smile on her face. "Indeed it was. Looks like we're taking a trip down memory lane." As the family prepared to leave the diner, each lost in thought about what might await them at the bank and beyond, they failed to notice a figure watching them from a booth in the corner, his face hidden behind a newspaper. As the bell above the door jingled, signaling their departure, the man lowered his paper, revealing a face that bore a striking resemblance to Robert Henderson. The first great twist in their journey had been set in motion, and the Hendersons were about to discover that their family history and their future was far more complex than they had ever imagined. The Greenville National Bank stood as an imposing granite edifice in the heart of downtown, its classical columns a stark contrast to the modern glass and steel structures surrounding it. The Henderson family filed through its heavy oak doors, the marble floors echoing their footsteps in the cavernous lobby. Michael strode purposefully to the counter, the small key clutched tightly in his hand. "We need to access a safety deposit box," he announced, his voice carrying a hint of his old authority. The bank manager, a portly man with thinning hair and thick glasses, peered at them suspiciously. "Of course, sir. May I see some identification?" As Michael fumbled for his wallet, Sarah wheeled herself forward. "Perhaps I can be of assistance," she said softly, producing a weathered bank book from her purse. "I believe my late husband, Robert Henderson, made arrangements for this day." The manager's eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Henderson, of course, we've been expecting you." He lowered his voice, glancing around furtively. "If you'll all follow me, please." They were led to a private room, where a large safety deposit box sat on a polished wooden table. Michael's hands shook slightly as he inserted the key, turning it with a satisfying click. As the lid lifted, the family leaned in eagerly, only to be met with confusion. Inside the box was not the expected stack of cash or valuable bonds, but a single envelope and a small, leather-bound journal. Michael snatched up the envelope, tearing it open. His face contorted as he read aloud. "My dear family, if you're reading this, then you've taken another step on the path I've laid out for you. I know you were probably expecting to find a fortune in this box. Instead, I offer you something far more valuable: the truth. The journal you see contains the full story of our family's history, both the triumphs and the mistakes. It's time you understood the real source of our wealth and the price that was paid for it. Michael, my son, this next part is especially for you. I know you've always strived to live up to what you thought were my expectations. But in doing so, you've lost sight of what truly matters. The ruthless pursuit of wealth at any cost is not the legacy I wanted to leave. There is still a chance to set things right, to redefine what it means to be a Henderson. But it will require all of you to confront some hard truths and make amends for past wrongs. Your next step is to seek out Maria Gonzalez at the Westside Community Center. She has been waiting a long time for this day. Remember, true redemption comes not from wealth, but from the choices we make and the lives we touch. With love and hope for your future, Robert. As Michael finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emma reached out, squeezing her husband's trembling hand. David leaned against the wall, his mind racing. Lucas looked from face to face, trying to understand the weight of what had just been revealed. Sarah, however, sat calmly in her wheelchair, a mix of sadness and relief on her face. "I think," she said softly, "it's time I told you the full story of your father's early days and the decision that haunted him for the rest of his life." Over the next hour, in that small bank room, Sarah unfolded a tale that shook the Henderson family to its core. She spoke of Robert's desperate early days, of a business deal gone wrong, and a choice made in a moment of weakness that led to their initial fortune, but at a terrible cost to others. "Your father spent the rest of his life trying to make amends," Sarah concluded, her eyes moist. "This journey he's set you on, it's his final attempt to right the wrongs of the past and teach you the true meaning of wealth and family." Michael sat stunned, the journal clutched in his hands. The arrogance and bravado that had defined him for so long seemed to crumble away, leaving behind a man grappling with a legacy far more complex than he had ever imagined. "All these years," he whispered, "I thought I was living up to his example, but I was just repeating his mistakes." David moved to his brother's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We all have a chance to do better now, Mike. That's what Dad wanted for us." Lucas, who had been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up. "So what do we do now? Who's Maria Gonzalez?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Maria was the daughter of the man your grandfather's actions hurt the most. The community center where she works, it's in the neighborhood that suffered when your grandfather's early business deal went south." The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. The Hendersons were being called not just to solve a puzzle, but to confront the very foundations of their family's wealth and identity. As they left the bank, each lost in their own thoughts, they failed to notice the same mysterious figure from the diner watching them from across the street. He pulled out a phone, dialing quickly. "They've received the journal," he said in a low voice. Proceeding to phase 2, the Hendersons climbed into their cars, setting off for the West Side Community Center, unaware that their journey was about to take an even more unexpected turn. The path to redemption would require them to face not only their past but also forces actively working to challenge their newfound unity. As they drove through the city, the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown gave way to more modest neighborhoods. The contrast served as a stark reminder of the inequality their family's actions had perpetuated, and the responsibility they now bore to make things right. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test their newfound understanding and commitment to change. The true measure of the Henderson family was about to be taken, not in dollars and cents, but in courage, compassion, and the willingness to face the consequences of their past. The West Side Community Center stood in stark contrast to the opulent world the Hendersons had left behind. Its faded brick exterior and chain-link fence spoke of years of neglect, yet a sense of warmth and life emanated from within. Colorful murals decorated the walls, depicting scenes of community and hope. As the family approached the entrance, Michael hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. I don't know if I can do this," he muttered, the weight of their family's past sins heavy on his shoulders. Emma placed a gentle hand on his back. "We're all in this together, Michael. It's time to face our history." They entered to find a bustling hive of activity. Children laughed as they worked on art projects. Elderly residents played chess in a corner, and the aroma of home-cooked meals wafted from a small kitchen. A stern-looking woman in her 60s approached them, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded. Sarah wheeled forward. "We're looking for Maria Gonzalez," she said softly. The woman's eyes narrowed. "I'm Maria, and you must be the Hendersons." Her gaze swept over the family, lingering on Michael. "I've been waiting a long time for this day." Maria led them to a small office, closing the door behind them. The walls were covered with photographs, children smiling, community events, and one faded picture of a young man standing proudly in front of a small grocery store. "That was my father," Maria said, noticing their gaze. "Before your family's business deal destroyed everything he'd worked for." Michael stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Ms. Gonzalez, we had no idea. My father's letter brought us here to make amends. Please, tell us what we can do." Maria's hard expression softened slightly. "Robert contacted me years ago, explaining everything. He helped fund this center as part of his attempt to make things right. But there's still so much work to be done." She pulled out a folder, spreading documents across her desk. "Your father set up a challenge. If you truly want to make amends, you'll need to invest not just your money, but yourselves in this community." The challenge was daunting. Each family member was assigned a task that would push them far outside their comfort zones. Michael was to work with local small business owners, using his expertise to help them thrive rather than exploiting them. David was tasked with teaching computer skills to unemployed residents, helping them become job-ready in the digital age. Emma was to organize a fundraising gala, but with a twist, she had to do it on a shoestring budget, learning to create elegance without extravagance. Lucas was given the job of creating a mural with local kids, telling the story of the neighborhood's resilience. Sarah, despite her frail health, insisted on contributing by sharing her recipes and cooking skills in the center's kitchen. "You have 1 month," Maria explained. "At the end of that time, if you've truly committed yourselves to these tasks and made a real difference, I'll give you the next piece of Robert's puzzle." The family exchanged glances, a mix of trepidation and determination in their eyes. This was more than they had bargained for, but deep down, they knew it was exactly what they needed. As they left the center, each lost in thought about the challenges ahead, they were unaware of the ripple effect their presence had caused. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood the Hendersons were back, and this time they were here to help. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Michael, stripped of his usual power and influence, found himself humbled as he worked alongside struggling entrepreneurs. He was surprised to discover a sense of fulfillment in using his skills to uplift others rather than outmaneuver them. David, normally reserved and analytical, was pushed to connect with people on a personal level. He found unexpected joy in seeing the pride on his students' faces as they mastered new skills. Emma, accustomed to limitless budgets, was forced to get creative. She discovered a talent for bringing people together and found beauty in simplicity. Lucas threw himself into the mural project, his artistic talents blossoming as he worked alongside kids who taught him about resilience and joy in the face of adversity. Sarah, despite her physical limitations, became the heart of the community kitchen, her warmth and stories drawing people together over shared meals. As the month progressed, a transformation began to take place, not just in the community, but within the Hendersons themselves. The superficial markers of status they had once prized fell away, replaced by a growing sense of purpose and connection. Yet challenges remained. Michael struggled with bouts of frustration and self-doubt. Emma faced resistance from her socialite friends who couldn't understand her new priorities. David grappled with the realization of how disconnected he'd been from the real world. Through it all, they leaned on each other, finding strength in their newfound family unity. The journey their father had set them on was changing them in ways they had never anticipated. As the month drew to a close, Maria called them back to her office. The change in the family was evident. Gone was the polished veneer of privilege, replaced by a hard-earned humility and sense of purpose. Maria smiled, genuine warmth in her eyes for the first time. "You've surprised me," she admitted. "Robert would be proud of the changes you've made." She handed them an envelope. "This contains the next step in your journey. But remember, the real treasure isn't at the end of this path. It's in what you've discovered along the way." As the Hendersons left the community center, a sense of anticipation mingled with their newfound purpose. They had faced their past and begun to forge a new legacy. But what challenges lay ahead? And would their transformation withstand the tests to come? Unknown to them, the mysterious figure who had been watching their progress made another phone call. "They've passed the first real test," he reported. "Proceed to the final phase." The sun set over the west side, casting long shadows as the Hendersons drove home. They were no longer the same family that had arrived a month ago, and the next stage of their journey promised to challenge them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The Henderson family gathered in the living room of their once grand mansion, now feeling more like a home than a showpiece. The envelope from Maria Gonzalez lay unopened on the coffee table, a tangible symbol of how far they had come and the unknown path still ahead. Sarah, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and anticipation, spoke first. "Before we open that, I want you all to know how proud I am of the changes you've made. Your grandfather would be too." Michael, his usual polished appearance replaced by a more relaxed demeanor, nodded solemnly. "I never thought I'd say this, but this journey has given me more than any business deal ever could." Emma squeezed his hand, her own eyes misting. "We've all grown so much. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." David carefully opened the envelope, his hand steady as he unfolded the letter inside. As he began to read aloud, Robert Henderson's final message filled the room. "My dear family, if you're reading this, you've taken the most crucial step in understanding the true meaning of our family legacy. You've learned that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the good we do in this world. Your final task brings you back to where it all began, our family home. But this time you'll see it with new eyes. In my study, behind the painting of the old oak tree, you'll find a safe. The combination is the date we moved into this house. The day I promised myself I'd build a legacy of more than just money. What you find inside may surprise you. Remember, the greatest treasures are often not what we expect. I love you all, and I'm so proud of the family you've become. Robert." A hushed silence fell over the room as David finished reading. Lucas, brimming with excitement, was the first to speak. "What are we waiting for? Let's go to the study." As they made their way to Robert's old study, a room they had barely entered since his passing, there was a palpable sense of anticipation. The painting of the old oak tree, a scene from the family's woodland cabin, seemed to take on new significance as Michael carefully lifted it from the wall. Behind it, just as Robert had said, was a small wall safe. With trembling hands, Michael entered the combination. The safe door swung open with a soft click. Inside was not the expected stacks of cash or valuable documents, but a single leather-bound book and another envelope. David picked up the book, his eyes widening as he flipped through its pages. It's a complete record of all the charitable works Dad did over the years. Anonymously, there are hundreds of lives he changed, causes he supported. Emma opened the envelope, reading its contents aloud. "My beloved family, the true wealth of the Hendersons was never in our bank accounts. It was in the good we did in secret, in the lives we touched without seeking recognition. The secret bank account I promise does exist, but not in the way you might have expected. Over the years, I've established a foundation, funded by a significant portion of our family's wealth. Its purpose is to continue the work you've just begun, to support communities in need, and to right the wrongs of the past. You now stand at a crossroads. The foundation is yours to control. You can liquidate it, reclaim the wealth you thought was lost. Or you can choose to continue this legacy of quiet generosity, finding richness in improving the lives of others. The choice is yours, but I believe I already know what you'll decide. With all my love and faith in you, Robert." As Emma's voice trailed off, the room fell into a stunned silence. The implications of Robert's final revelation washed over them. Michael was the first to break the silence, his voice thick with emotion. All this time, I thought I was living up to Dad's legacy by chasing wealth and status. But this is what he was really about. Sarah wheeled closer, taking Michael's hand. Your father knew this day would come. He believed in you, in all of you, to make the right choice when the time came. Lucas, wise beyond his years, spoke up. We can't go back to how we were before. Not after everything we've learned, everything we've seen. David nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. The real work is just beginning. We have a chance to make a real difference, to redefine what the Henderson name means. Emma smiled, tears in her eyes. I think we all know what we need to do. As the family stood united, their decision unspoken but unanimous, there was a soft knock at the study door. They turned to see the mysterious figure who had been watching them throughout their journey. The man stepped into the light, revealing a face that was hauntingly familiar, a younger version of Robert Henderson. Hello, he said, his voice gentle. I'm Robert Jr., your father's son from before he met Sarah. He asked me to watch over you on this journey, to make sure you found your way. And I have to say, he would be so proud of the choice you've made. The revelation of this final twist, a brother they never knew existed, was met not with shock or resentment, but with open arms. The Hendersons had learned the true meaning of family, of legacy, and of wealth. As they welcomed Robert Jr. into their midst, the first rays of dawn broke through the study windows. It was a new day for the Henderson family, the beginning of a legacy far richer and more meaningful than they could have ever imagined. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their newfound purpose and expanded family, they knew that the greatest treasure had been within them all along, the capacity for growth, for compassion, and for making a real difference in the world. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.